Welcome to The Secret, the podcast that delves into fascinating and often pivotal moments in history. Today, we journey back to the medieval world, to the heart of the Byzantine Empire, and explore a weapon so terrifying, so effective, that its very existence remained a closely guarded secret for centuries. We're talking about Greek fire.
Imagine this, ancient ships suddenly ablaze, not just on fire, but covered in this weird stuff that water couldn't put out, clinging to the wood, setting the sea itself alight. Today, we're diving deep into something as old as war itself, the history of chemical weapons. It's ingenious, terrifying, often ethically, well, complicated. From legendary sea fire to the invisible threats we face now, we're going to unpack the surprising facts, how these weapons evolved, and the dilemmas they still pose. Our mission here is to really shortcut your understanding. We'll pull the key nuggets from the history, the science, the military reports you shared with us. Get ready for some aha moments. Let's start with one of the most famous, maybe infamous, ancient weapons, Greek fire. A real historical marvel, they say. It secured empires. But what was this stuff? This fire that burned on water?
Greek fire, yeah, it was an incendiary weapon system, used mostly by the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantines, starting around 672 CE. Its main job was in naval battles setting enemy ships on fire, and it was incredibly good at it.
Because it kept burning on water, right?
Yeah.
That's the legendary part.
Exactly. That's what made it so potent and, frankly, terrifying. Some accounts even suggest it could ignite on contact with water, though that's debated. But think about the psychological impact. It was crucial for the Byzantines. It helped save Constantinople from Arab sieges, not once, but twice. Really vital for their survival.
Okay, but the big mystery is, what was in it? How did they make this watery inferno? It was a huge state secret, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A closely guarded secret, and the exact formula is now lost, completely lost to history. But modern scholarship, looking at the evidence, has a pretty good idea. The consensus is that it was likely based on crude or refined petroleum, sort of like an early version of napalm.
Napalm, wow.
Yeah, and to get that sticky quality, historians think they might have literally called it sticky fire and make it burn longer. They probably added thickeners, things like pine resin, maybe animal fat.
What about other stuff people mentioned?
Right.
Like quicklime or saltpeter?
Those get mentioned, yeah. But experiments and just the practicalities of using it at sea suggest that they probably weren't the main ignition source. Petroleum seems much more likely for sustained burning on water.
So it wasn't just a bucket of flammable goo, it was a whole delivery system. How did they actually, deploy it?
Right, it was sophisticated. The main method was projecting it through tubes called cephnes. These were mounted on special ships, dromons, often under the forecastle, sometimes midships, or even at the back.
I read about these descriptions, like animal heads spewing fire.
Exactly. Anna Comnene wrote about that in the 11th century. Beast-shaped projectors, brass or iron, lions or other animals on the ship's bow, looking like they were, quote, vomiting fire. Incredible imagery.
And there were portable versions too.
Yes, Karasifnes. You could think of them as the earliest flamethrowers, really. Handheld projectors. Plus, they could fill jars or grenades with the stuff and launch them with catapults for longer range.
So the secret wasn't just the recipe.
Precisely. That's the key takeaway. The Byzantines didn't just have a formula, they had an entire weapon system. Compartmentalized knowledge was crucial. You had the operators, the technicians who maintained the safeties, the specialized ships, the training. It was a whole package.
So that's why when enemies captured some of it.
Exactly, like the Bulgars in 814. They captured safeties, they captured quantities of the actual substance, but they couldn't replicate its use effectively. They didn't have the whole system, the know-how.
And eventually, the secret just faded.
It seems so. Probably lost sometime around the Fourth Crusade, early 13th century. A truly unique weapon that vanished.
Okay, so from Greek fire, let's zoom out. Chemical warfare, it turns out, wasn't born in the 20th century. Its roots go way, way back.
Oh, absolutely. Much further back than most people realize. We're talking ancient civilizations. You've got ancient Egyptians maybe working with poisons like hydrocyanic acid around 3000 BCE.
3000 BC.
Yeah. Then in India, around 2000 BCE, dynasties using smoke screens, toxic fumes to induce sleep. Chinese texts from 1000 BCE mention arsenic-based soul-hunting fog and stink bombs.
Even the Greeks, besides the Byzantines later.
Oh yes. Solon, back in 590 BCE, supposedly poisoned a river with hellebore roots during a siege, caused severe diarrhea, helped defeat the city, and the Spartans during the Peloponnesian War used burning pitch and sulfur to create choking, possibly arsenic-laced smoke against besieged cities like Plataea and Delium.
Sounds nasty. Did the Romans use similar tactics?
They did. Roman sources mention toxic smokes designed to cause blindness and lung problems, effects kind of similar to modern phosgenes. So, yeah, chemical tactics are ancient.
But what's fascinating is even back then, people seemed to recognize this was different, maybe uniquely horrible. I read about an early treaty.
You're probably thinking of the Strasbourg Agreement of 1675. It's considered the first international agreement trying to ban perfidious and odious toxic devices.
1675, that's really early for an arms control agreement.
It is. It shows a very early awareness that these kinds of weapons crossed a line, even in the brutal context of warfare back then.
But that awareness didn't stop development, did it? Fast forward a couple of centuries.
No, it didn't. By the 19th century, science is advancing. You get proposals like Lyon Playfair's idea in 1854 for an artillery shell filled with cacodyl cyanide, but it was shot down. The British military dismissed it, famously saying it was as bad as poisoning the wells of the enemy. So still some moral reluctance.
Even in the American Civil War.
Right. There were proposals then too. Chlorine gas, chloroform sprays. But again, they were rejected. Commanders like Ulysses S. Grant considered them inhumane.
So this historical hesitation, what changed? Why did the floodgates open in World War I?
Trench warfare. Simple as that. The brutal, grinding stalemate on the Western Front created a desperate search for any way to break the deadlock.
And despite efforts like the Hague Conventions trying to limit these things,
They were basically ignored or circumvented in the face of military necessity, or perceived necessity.
and it's often thought the Germans were the first to use gas in WWI, but that's not quite right, is it?
Not quite. Technically, the French used tear gas first. Ethyl bromoacetate grenades fired against the Germans in August 1914, irritating but not lethal on a large scale.
So the Germans took it to a whole new level.
They did. The big moment, the game changer, was the Second Battle of Ypres, April 1915. That's when they released chlorine gas on a massive scale. Under the direction of the chemist Fritz Haber, a Nobel laureate, ironically, they released 168 tons of chlorine from thousands of cylinders.
168 tons. What was the impact?
Devastating, especially psychologically. Reports claim around 5,000 Allied casualties almost immediately. Greenish-yellow clouds drifting across the lines, troops choking, panicking. The Germans didn't fully exploit the breach it created, but the shock was immense. It truly opened Pandora's box.
And this Fritz Haber, quite a controversial figure.
Extremely. A brilliant scientist, developed the process for synthesizing ammonia, vital for fertilizers and explosives. He oversaw the Ypres attack, even helped develop early gas masks. But his wife, also a chemist, committed suicide, reportedly in protest over his work on chemical weapons. And later, his work on pesticides led to Zyklon B.
The gas used in the Nazi death camps. A tragic, horrifying legacy.
It really highlights that phrase, the war of the chemists. Brilliant minds turned to creating horrific weapons. His French counterpart, Victor Grignard, also a Nobel winner, worked on countermeasures. A terrible scientific arms race.
And once the Germans used chlorine at Ypres, retaliation was swift.
Inevitable. The British used chlorine at the Battle of Loos in September 1915, and then the race was truly on. Both sides rapidly developed new agents, better delivery systems, better defenses.
What came after chlorine?
Phosgene was next. Much more lethal than chlorine, harder to detect initially, smells like moldy hay. Crucially, its worst effects could be delayed for hours, meaning soldiers might seem fine initially, then collapse later. It actually caused the most gas deaths in WWI.
And then diphosphine, and the really notorious one, mustard gas.
Ah, mustard gas, yes. Called the king of the war gases, for good reason. It wasn't primarily about killing, though it could. It was about incapacitating large numbers of troops and making ground unusable.
How did it work? It wasn't really a gas.
No, technically an aerosol of oily droplets. And it was a vesicant. It caused horrific blisters inside and out. Lungs, eyes, skin. Plus, it was persistent. It could linger in soil, on equipment, for days or weeks depending on the weather, so capturing an enemy trench could be a death trap. It was an area denial weapon.
And it could go through clothing, right, absorbed through the skin.
Yes, that made it particularly insidious. Gas masks protected the lungs and eyes, but mustard gas attacked the whole body. Significant exposure, maybe over 50% of the body, was often lethal.
What about the American troops? They arrived later in the war.
They did, entering in 1917, and they were initially quite unprepared for the scale of gas warfare. They learned quickly, tragically, that it was just, as they put it, an inescapable fact of life on the Western Front.
The numbers are pretty stark.
They are. Around 72,000 U.S. gas casualties out of about 272,000 total casualties. About 1,200 U.S. deaths directly from gas. It showed just how effective, how brutal these weapons had become.
After the horrors of WWI, you'd think that would be it. A major push to ban them for good.
There was definitely a push. The 1925 Geneva Protocol aimed to ban the use of chemical and biological weapons in war, but it didn't ban production or stockpiling, and many nations signed with reservations saying they'd only abide by it if their enemies did too.
So development continued, and even use.
Yes. The interwar period saw continued research on, unfortunately, use. A really stark example is the Italo-Ethiopian War in 1935-36. Italy, under Mussolini, used mustard gas extensively against Ethiopian forces who had virtually no protection, bombed military targets, but also villages, civilians, livestock.
How effective was it there?
Reports vary, interestingly. Major Fisk, who was an American observer with the Italians, kind of downplayed its military impact. But Captain Meade, another observer with the Ethiopians, called it the most effective Italian weapon. Said it shattered morale, terrified the troops, killed their crucial pack animals. It certainly contributed significantly to the Italian victory.
And the world's reaction?
Outrage, condemnation, but ultimately ineffective sanctions. It showed that the international norms were still quite weak.
Okay, moving into World War II. Given the developments, you'd expect massive chemical warfare, wouldn't you? But it didn't really happen on the major battlefields. Why?
That's one of the big questions of WWII. There wasn't large-scale battlefield use between the main Allied and Axis powers in Europe. Why the restraint? Several theories. One is Hitler's own experience being gassed in WWI. He was temporarily blinded by mustard gas in 1917 and perhaps had a personal aversion.
Or maybe just fear of retaliation.
That's probably the biggest factor. All major powers had large stockpiles by then. They knew if they used gas, the other side would respond in kind, maybe even more devastatingly. Mutual deterrence, essentially.
Behind the scenes, Germany wasn't idle, were they? This is where nerve agents come in.
Exactly. Here's where it gets really chilling. While battlefield use was restrained, German scientists, led by Gerhard Schrader, made a terrifying breakthrough in the 1930s. They discovered nerve agents. Initially, they were researching insecticides, but they stumbled upon compounds that were orders of magnitude more lethal than anything used in WWI. First Tabun, or GA, then sarin, GB.
How much more lethal are we talking?
Sarin was estimated to be maybe 5 to 10 times more lethal than Tabun. And later, after the war, British scientists discovered VX, which is even worse. On skin contact, VX is thought to be maybe 1,000 times more toxic than sarin. A single pinhead-sized drop could kill in 15 minutes.
Unbelievable. Did the Nazis plan to use these in combat?
They produced large quantities, especially of Tabun and sarin, weaponized them in bombs and shells. But they never used them against Allied military forces. The reasons aren't entirely clear, maybe fear of retaliation, maybe underestimating Allied capabilities or internal disagreements. But the tragic irony, as we mentioned, is that another chemical developed from Fritz Haber's earlier work, the cyanide-based pesticide Zyklon B, was used by the Nazis for mass murder in the gas chambers of concentration camps.
A horrifying perversion of science. So after the war, the Cold War kicks off a new arms race, including in chemical weapons.
Absolutely. Both the US and the Soviet Union captured German nerve agent technology and scientists and started their own massive programs, developing agents like sarin, VX, and others, plus delivery systems and defenses.
And the US wasn't just developing them, they were testing them on soldiers.
Yes, unfortunately. There was a significant human testing program from roughly 1955 to 1975. Over 6,000 US soldiers were exposed to around 250 different chemical agents, including nerve agents and hallucinogens, often without full knowledge or consent. Many suffered long-term health problems.
And there were accidents too, weren't there?
Yes, incidents that brought public attention to these secret programs. The Dugway sheep kill in 1968, where an open-air test of VX drifted off the Utah test range and killed over 3,000 sheep miles away. And then in 1969, a sarin leak at a U.S. base in Okinawa sickened several personnel, revealing secret overseas storage of nerve agents.
That must have caused a huge outcry.
It did. Public pressure, combined with these incidents, led President Nixon to announce a major policy shift in 1969. The U.S. unilaterally renounced the first use of lethal chemical weapons and all methods of biological warfare. He also included incapacitating agents in the no first use policy for chemicals. And eventually, in 1975, the U.S. finally ratified the 1925 Geneva Protocol, a big step.
But the Soviets were still building up their stockpiles.
Oh yes. The Soviets maintained a huge chemical weapons capability throughout the Cold War. Doctrine, training, equipment, massive stockpiles. The U.S. military saw this as a major threat, a potential decisive military advantage for the Warsaw Pact in a European conflict.
So while the major powers showed restraint, did nerve agents ever actually get used in combat after WWII?
Tragically, yes. The first confirmed use wasn't by a major power, but during the Yemen Civil War between 1962 and 1970, Egypt, intervening on the side of the Republicans, used chemical weapons against royalist forces. This included mustard gas, phosgene, and crucially, nerve agents.
Nerve agents used in Yemen, was that widely known?
The Red Cross investigated and confirmed it, but the world's reaction was pretty muted. Got overshadowed by Vietnam, the Arab-Israeli conflict, other crises. It was a worrying sign that the taboo could be broken without major consequences.
And then the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. That seemed like a major escalation.
It really was. Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, used chemical weapons extensively against Iran, especially mustard gas and the nerve agent taboon. They used them tactically against Iranian troops, particularly their large human wave infantry assaults where soldiers often had little protection, but also horrifically against civilian populations, including Iraqi Kurds in places like Halabja.
Did the world react more strongly that time?
There was more international condemnation. UN investigations confirmed Iraq's use. Investigators explicitly warned that this widespread use had broken a taboo and made it easier for future combatants to justify using chemical weapons. A very ominous warning.
Which brings us closer to the present. The Persian Gulf War in 1990-91. Iraq definitely had these weapons by then.
Yes, a massive arsenal, chemical, biological. There was huge concern they would use them against coalition forces. The U.S. and its allies prepared extensively. Troops had protective gear, detectors, antidotes like atropine and prelidoxim chloride auto-injectors, vaccines against biological agents like anthrax.
But Iraq didn't use them.
As far as we know, no Iraqi WMD were used during the main conflict. Why not? Fear of massive retaliation, perhaps including nuclear retaliation, is the most likely reason. Saddam Hussein might have seen them as weapons of last resort if his regime was collapsing.
But there were still issues after the war. Gulf War syndrome.
Yes, the lingering controversy over Gulf War syndrome, the unexplained illnesses suffered by veterans. Multiple factors are suspected, including potential low-level exposure to chemical agents, and specifically the incident at the Qamishia ammunition depot in Iraq in 1991. U.S. forces destroyed bunkers there, not realizing at the time they contained sarin and mustard gas rockets. Thousands of U.S. troops were potentially exposed to the fallout.
So even without direct use, the danger was there.
Exactly, and even into the 21st century, the threat hasn't vanished, despite the Chemical Weapons Convention, which aims for total elimination.
Like the Moscow theater crisis.
Right. In 2002, Russian special forces used an incapacitating agent believed to be a fentanyl derivative to subdue Chechen hostage takers. Over 100 hostages died from the effects of the gas.
And insurgents using chlorine.
Yeah, in Iraq around 2007, insurgents started packing chlorine tanks into car bombs. Not a sophisticated military agent, but using a common industrial chemical as a weapon to cause panic and casualties, shows how the threat can adapt and persist. So, if we pull it all together, it's quite a journey. From that ancient Byzantine sticky fire that burned on water, through the horrors of WWI gas clouds that choked the trenches, to the invisible, terrifyingly lethal nerve agents developed later. The history of chemical warfare is this constant back and forth, isn't it, between seeking a tactical edge and grappling with the profound ethical horror these weapons represent.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this? I think these accounts really underscore that chemical weapons aren't just some dusty chapter in history books. They're a persistent, evolving challenge. General Pershing said it after WWI. We can never afford to neglect the question of chemical preparedness. That still feels relevant today. And it leaves you with a pretty deep question, doesn't it? Despite all the bans, all the horrific lessons learned. What is it about warfare, or maybe human nature, that keeps tempting people to reach for the chemical option? And what does this ongoing struggle tell us about ourselves, our capacity for incredible innovation, but also for truly profound destruction? Something to really think about.